In this video, I'm going to talk about 10 wild edibles you can find in the springtime. Most of these plants and mushrooms are common, but a few of these are a little tricky to find, like morels and ramps. Now, stinging nettle might be the most nutritious plant in the forest. It's known for its stinging hairs that act as hypodermic needles that inject histamine into the body, causing a stinging reaction. The hairs are actually easily deactivated by heating or drying. Despite the sting, these are an edible plant. A single serving of stinging nettle contains 100% of your vitamin A and 50% of your calcium, as well as zinc, iron, and magnesium. In the early spring, you can harvest these plants without gloves, but as the season progresses, the stinging hairs will begin to develop more and more, and it'll become more painful to harvest these plants without gloves. Stinging nettle also has a whole host of medicinal properties. Despite their stinging hairs, these plants are actually anti-inflammatory and can actually reduce histamine in the body when taken internally. Nettle can help fight urinary tract infections, help with enlarged prostates, balance blood sugar, and increase testosterone by binding with excess estrogen. For medicinal uses, you can make an infusion by steeping the nettle overnight in boiling water. If you want to use nettle as a food, you can use it in lieu of cooked spinach, and nettle soup recipes are absolutely delicious. The next spring wild edible is red dead nettle. Now, dead nettle is not a true nettle and is actually part of the mint family. This soft plant contains no stinging hairs, so you don't have to worry about any painful reactions to this plant. Dead nettle has triangular shaped leaves with small, fine hairs. The plant's leaves are clustered towards the top of the plant, and sometimes they have a slight reddish purple hue. The plant has pinkish purple leaves that extrude off the sides of the plant, and it is inedible as well. Dead nettle has opposite paired leaves and it has a square stem because it's in the mint family. Now, this plant is edible. It can be eaten raw or cooked. It's not quite as tasty as regular nettle in my opinion, but it's still a pretty good plant. Henbit is a plant that's often confused with dead nettle. However, henbit has clover-shaped jagged leaves in contrast to dead nettle's triangular shaped leaves. Also, henbit's tubular flowers are often angled like slightly vertically. Henbit has a similar taste to kale and can be used in salads and smoothies. Henbit can also be used medicinally to treat wounds and skin problems. These honeycomb shaped mushrooms are some of the most sought after spring fungi. They're known as morel mushrooms, and they grow on the forest floor when the soil temperature is between 45 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Morels tend to have a relationship with certain hardwood trees, specifically decaying elm, ash, apple, and tulip poplar trees in the southeastern region. They also like to grow on south-facing slopes and disturbed sites like burn areas and logging sites. To ID these mushrooms, you want to make sure the cap and stem are hollow. And on most morel species, the cap will be attached to the stem. There is one caveat, which is the half-free morel, where the bottom of the cap is not attached to the stem. But in every other morel, the cap will be attached. Morels are a choice edible mushroom that is delicious sauteed. These mushrooms should be never eaten raw, partially cooked, or with alcohol. In the springtime, I really like to combine ramps with morels. It is a delicious combination. Ramps are a pungent wild edible in the Allium genus. They are a spring ephemeral, meaning the leaves come up in the spring and they're usually gone by the time the summer hits. These plants are taking advantage of the light coming through the forest without any leaves, but once the canopy develops in the summer, they can no longer thrive, so they go dormant. These garlic-smelling leaves emerge in mid-spring, and the leaves have an onion-like bulb under the ground. Now, ramps form in these massive patches, but they're often also easily over-harvested. And that's because the ramps only produce a couple seeds, and these seeds take about a year and a half to even form one leaf, and 3 years to form another seed. To sustainably harvest ramps, you want to pick one leaf from each plant, and you want to leave 80% of the patch alone. And if you're going to harvest the bulbs of the plants, I only harvest a few bulbs of the plants every year, and I leave like 99% of them alone. If you are going to harvest the bulbs of the plant, twist the crown as you pull it out, and this will leave the roots intact, so it might have a chance of creating another bulb. Now, the leaves will disappear by the summertime, but the reproduction cycle of ramps is not over. So after the ramp leaves are long gone in mid to late summer, the ramps will put up their seed balls, and this is a time where I like to go back to the patches I've harvested from in the spring, and I'll take some of the seeds, I'll plant them in the forest around the patch and even in other areas, so that we can expand the ramp population rather than just depleting it. Ramps have a strong garlic taste and can be eaten raw, but I also find that the flavor improves slightly when they're cooked, especially sauteed. Ramps can be pickled, they can be cooked with eggs, pasta, stir fries, or put on pizza. Now, if you're not much of a forager, but you want to try morels or ramps, you can find them on Foraged Market. Now, Foraged Market is a site where you can purchase wild mushrooms, plants, or even products like maple syrup or truffles. All these products are harvested sustainably from foragers around the country. And if you are a forager and you found a ton of morels, ramps, or chicken of the woods this year, you can sign up to be a vendor on Foraged Market and sell your mushrooms or plants to people all over the country. Now, I personally use Foraged Market to sell mushroom extracts and also extra mushrooms I have throughout the year. Dandelion is very common but often overlooked wild edible and medicinal. Now, dandelions can be difficult to identify because there are so many lookalikes, especially at the early stages when there's only the leaves to work with. But here are some more characteristics of dandelion. They have a single unbranched stem, lobed leaves, and they produce a milky sap. Now, as an edible, the leaves make a pretty bitter green, but by simmering the leaves, you can improve the flavor significantly. Both the flowers and the leaves are edible. Dandelion is very high in vitamins like A, B, and C. Now, dandelion root tea has a very bitter flavor. It's kind of similar to coffee. This tea is great for the liver and the digestive system. It also contains a prebiotic called inulin, which is great for diabetics. These jiggly ear-shaped mushrooms were traditionally used in Asian cuisine. These are wood ear mushrooms. These gelatinous mushrooms have a ton of copper and B vitamin. One serving of wood ear contains 30% of your copper intake for the day. Wood ear grows on dead branches, limbs, and twigs. It's best to look for wood ear after a rain because when it's been very dry for a while, wood ear mushrooms will tend to shrivel up and they'll look like raisins. You can barely see them. Wood ears are excellent for soups and stir fries, especially if you add them in with other wild edibles like garlics and ramps. Now, amber jelly roll is a more formless and translucent cousin of wood ear. This jelly fungi looks very similar, however it forms in denser clusters than wood ear and has less of an ear shape and more wrinkles. Amber jelly roll can be used in a very similar way to wood ear, so you're going to want to use it in soups, stir fries. Usually sauteing these mushrooms doesn't work too well on their own because they'll just like shrivel up. And here's a comparison of the mushrooms side by side so you can really tell a difference. Chickweed is one of the first edible greens in the forest during the springtime. These plants form in dense mats on the forest floor and they spread out horizontally. Chickweed has teardrop shaped leaves that form in opposite pairs. Chickweed has fine little hairs that form on the sides of the stem. Chickweed also has stalks that connect the leaf to the main stem called petioles. You want to distinguish chickweed from its poisonous lookalike scarlet pimpernel, which I cover in another video on chickweed. Chickweed is a delicious salad green that has a similar crunchy taste to sprouts. This is a very easy plant to collect in abundance because it forms in such dense clusters. It's not uncommon to find a whole forest floor covered with chickweed. This plant is also very nutrient dense with a lot of vitamin C, calcium, and iron. In addition to being a salad green, it makes an amazing pesto. Lastly, we have two more alliums, wild onions and wild garlic. These wild alliums are very common. You'll often find them growing in lawns and in the forests. These plants are very easy to identify because they look like the traditional scallions and onions, and they also have a very strong garlicky odor to them. Now, the wild onions have flat leaves and the wild garlic has tubular scallion-like leaves. Now, these plants aren't as flavorful as, say, a ramp, but they are extremely common and it's very hard to over-harvest these two. I like using wild garlic and onions to make a really good scallion pancake. All you do is chop up the onions and fold them into some dough and then cook it up like a pancake. Later in the season, you can harvest the garlic scapes for soups or stir fries.